Not yet. I'm making eyes at somebody in the back of the room. She'll get it for me. I'm pretty loud, but they don't usually say I'm quiet. How about now? Welcome everyone to the 9th Annual Historic Preservation Symposium. I can't believe we've been doing this for 9 years now. I'm Katie Peterson, a senior planner here for the Town of Bluffton, and I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight, and some of the people who are watching on the screen at home, thank you for being with us as well. Tonight we celebrate historic preservation and why it matters. History is what gives Bluffton its unique identity, and why so many people are attracted to live, work, and visit here. And some of those visitors don't ever leave. Largely, it's due to our dedication to preserving the stories, structures, and resources that tell us about our collective past. Or, if you're hanging out in Old Town, the Bluffton state of mind. We also celebrate National Historic Preservation Month, which is an annual celebration held by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This year, their theme for Preservation Month is People Saving Places. Each May, we shine a spotlight on how individuals contribute to preserving places in big and small ways. People in our community and around the country pour their time, energy, resources, sometimes their sweat and their tears, into protecting the places that they care so deeply about. Tonight, we will hear about how the Town of Bluffton and a private resident have joined forces to preserve some of our community's treasured structures and how we are preserving the stories of our past. Once we know the stories, they bring history to life each time we pass by those spaces. Debbie Wunder, one of our presenters tonight, will speak about preserving the old Bluffton post office, and I won't give too much away about that. But she and her husband, Rusty Pistachio, also preserved a structure called the Rate, which is right next door to the old post office, or on the corner if you're walking down Bridge Street here. The Rate, which was built in 1948, was a grocery store. And each time I walk past it, I hear Ann Hayward's voice saying, well, I don't know why they call it the Rate. That sign on the side of the building said cut rate prices, and somehow it just washed off, and so it said the Rate. And now everybody calls that building the Rate, but it was really just a slogan. And so every time I walk past it, I hear that story and I laugh and I go, well, I don't know why we call it the Rate. I wasn't here even when it was being functioned as a grocery store, but every time I walk past. And now, each time you all walk past, you'll also hear those words and you'll think, well, I don't know why we call it this, but we do. And hopefully you'll share that story with your visitors as they come in from out of town. Stories like these are among the building blocks of Bluffton's success. Bluffton is full of these stories because we keep them alive. We keep them alive by telling them. Each day, we currently are living the events and building the spaces that will add to the rich history found here in Bluffton for the people who will follow us. Today, Old Town Bluffton's local historic district, the Old Town Bluffton Historic District, which was established in 2007, boasts 87 contributing resources. Each one of those resources, and some buildings that aren't even on that list, have their own story. Tonight, we'll hear about the old Bluffton post office and its story. But before we hear about that story, I'd like to hand the mic over to Mayor Larry Toomer, who has made his home and his business the historic district of Bluffton here, for some opening remarks and to share a little bit about his Bluffton story.
Thank you, Katie. Well, see all these papers? I normally just speak from the heart and talk about the things that I know, not the ones that I've been told about. And when I say when I know, it's like if I see it with my own eyes, I know it. If you tell me it, it might be true and it might not. But so anyway, most of you I know. For the ones that don't, I've been around here a couple of days. I actually started the first grade here in the building right here 60 years ago this year. So I've watched Bluffton change. I watched it grow. And the older I get, the more I realize how the old stuff is really, really worth saving, you know, us included. So I wanted to hit on a few points. I just wanted to kind of say, you know, my grandfather moved to this area in 1913, all the way from Thunderbolt, Georgia. Started an oyster business on Hilton Head. I was born in 1958. The bridge was built to Hilton Head in 1956, so I don't remember that. But I do remember one of the best things about riding the school bus from Hilton Head to Bluffton was if the shrimp boats were going out at the same time, they had to open the bridge, and you'd have to sit there for 20 minutes. And then if you were lucky enough and it rained that night before, Burnt Church Road was all dirt, and it was a mud bog. So we had to come all the way around to 46 on the school bus. It ran 35 miles an hour. So, I mean, we could miss a good hour and 20 minutes of school. So that's, you know, that's history. So, you know, as I've watched Bluffton's history and, what is this? Oh, sorry about that. So, I realize how important the buildings, the structures, the historic trees and all that are. And I totally support preserving and protecting anything that we possibly can. My main thing is bringing emphasis to the most historic thing in this area is the river. The river was a lifeline for everyone here. If you wanted to go to Savannah back in the day before they built the bridge, you'd get on a steamship and you'd ride from Calhoun Street to River Street to Savannah to sell your chickens or your pigs or your vegetables or whatever, because there was nothing else here to do except for fishing and farming. And everyone depended on the river for something. If it weren't for actual food, it was for money that they could go buy food somewhere else, you know, other types of food. So the preserving our historic river is the top of my list. And I will always, as long as I can still swing, I'm going to keep swinging until we do all we can to preserve that. I'm about Calhoun Street. You know, I mean, Calhoun Street was a meeting place for people back then, and believe it or not, it still is. Right down Calhoun Street to the dock in the evenings, it's probably full just as we speak, people doing the same thing. I'm very proud of what the town does to preserve our history. And some other people, I saw somebody in here, we have a couple of local guys that are really amped it up on the stories of people that were here long before we were. And I think that's great. That's a way to kind of keep things alive and really appreciate what we used to have. To date, Town Council has funded more than $216,000 to preserve, protect, and rehabilitate 8 contributing resources, from the Hayward House to Campbell AME Church to several private residents. Excuse me. That's not including the millions that the town has spent on the Garvin House, the Squire Pope Cottage. We're about to get started with the Sarah Riley Hooks House, which is really, really historic, in my opinion. I knew those people when they were alive, so I think we're going to hear more about this. But 2 of those grants were awarded to Debbie Wunder and were used for a new roof and windows and door replacements for the old post office. I want to thank my colleagues on Town Council for making historic preservation a priority and funding projects which keep Bluffton the special place we all love. Special thanks to each member of the town's Historic Preservation Commission. These volunteers appointed by council are responsible for maintaining the historic integrity of many of our town's structures. They are the front lines of local preservation, and each past and current member deserves our appreciation for their work. Thank you to our town manager, Stephen Cease, and all town staff members who implement the policies and projects to make historic preservation alive in Bluffton. I think I've said enough. So, I don't know who's next, Katie. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Sumer. Now I'll hand the program over to Glen Umberger. I won't take too much of your time here. He's the historic preservationist on staff here. Glen's been with the town for about 3 years now, and he jumped right in when he got here. Since his arrival, he's been integral in the establishment of the grant program, while council was a huge supporter of it, and they are the ones who get to actually make those policies and put them in place. Glen has been championing it from the side. It's a hard word for me today. He's provided individual assistance to homeowners, to business owners, whether they were applying for a grant, applying for a certificate of appropriateness, or just wanted a little bit of advice on what they should do in order to help make their kitchen the right shape again. He has had those conversations. He's been at all of those. He's helped them all decide how they could move forward on that with work on their historic buildings. And he's also shared a lot of Bluffton successes and some of the things that we found as struggles to help other communities across the region be able to do the same. So with that, I'll turn it over to Glen Umberger to share a little bit more about the old post office. Glen?
If you have spent any time in the Old Town Bluffton Historic District, and most likely you have, you are already well acquainted with our notable Low Country vernacular style structures, including the Card House, one of the oldest surviving residences in Bluffton that was constructed around 1825. The house gets its unusual name from the high-stakes poker game held in the house in the 1840s, during which William Eddings Baynard won the deed to the 1,000-acre Braddock's Point plantation in Hilton Head from Colonel John Joseph Stoney, or what is today known as the Hayward House that was built in 1841 by John Cole, the owner of Moreland Plantation in present-day Palmetto Bluff, and later expanded. Later this evening, this will be the location of our closing reception. Or perhaps you know the Fripp House, which is double-height veranda built around 1830 by James L. Pope, which was acquired by the Fripp family in 1885. Of course, all these survived the burning of Bluffton on June 4th, 1863. But this evening, I would like to introduce you to another iconic landmark, the old post office, located just across the street, which has a rather interesting story to tell. A United States post office was first established at May River, South Carolina on May 21st, 1839, or 185 years ago this past week. And 3 years later, on April 22nd, 1842, the name of the village was officially changed to Bluffton. Postal operations in Bluffton continued uninterrupted until just after the Civil War, when in October 1866, the Bluffton Post Office was briefly discontinued, but soon thereafter was reestablished in January 1837. Over the next 100 years, the Bluffton Post Office occupied several different buildings, all of which were located near the geographical center of town. An early 20th century Sanborn style map identifies one such location in this small commercial structure that used to be at the corner of Bridge and Calhoun Streets. The post office moved here from this building across the street, seen in a photograph from 1939, following a mysterious fire in the early morning hours of December 18, 1941, which destroyed the store owned by William Simmonses, which had housed the post office since the 1920s. In February 1955, President Dwight Eisenhower nominated Lucille Hayward, a local resident, as postmaster for the town. Mrs. Hayward's appointment was confirmed by the United States Senate the following month. And in November of that same year, the Bluffton Post Office was on the move again, this time to just down the road to the corner of Bridge and Boundary Streets, into this building, which Mrs. Hayward and her husband had built in 1946 as a seasonal grocery store. This building was later used as an ice cream and sundae shop, which boldly advertised the seal test brand of ice cream and offered cut rate prices on its merchandise. Under provisions set forth in the Post Office Department Lease Purchase Act of 1952, the private sector constructed new buildings or modified existing ones to post office specifications, which remained under private ownership and were then leased back to the department for a set period of time. Here in Bluffton, the Post Office Department in Washington paid rent on a building that was owned by the local postmaster herself, seen here on the left in front of her former grocery store with Mrs. Idell Mock of Hardyville, who was the area's rural mail carrier. When Arthur Summerfield was appointed Postmaster General in 1953 by President Eisenhower, he inherited a department that was not only had suffered from decades of lack of proper funding due to the Great Depression and World War II, but was also experiencing widespread organizational dysfunction, caused in part by dramatic increase in demand for services brought on by the post-war suburban housing boom. One of Summerfield's chief goals as Postmaster General was to improve the efficiency of the department at a time when the average American was receiving about 300 pieces of mail annually. To help meet this goal, Summerfield advocated for the construction of new facilities across the country, primarily in rural areas. These new buildings were designed to be modern in style, efficient in the way that mail was handled, and distinctive as the iconic red, white, and blue color scheme was for its mailboxes and delivery vehicles. One particular advantage for Summerfield's ambitious building campaign was that there was no need for individual architects, since new buildings would be constructed according to a set of standards contained in the department's Building Designs Catalog, initially published in 1959. This guide provided artist renderings, schematic plans, and material specifications for uniformly efficient and architecturally attractive small post office buildings throughout the United States. These plans ranged in size from 1,000 square feet to 12,000 square feet, and accordingly, these buildings were referred to as 1,000 series post offices. The corresponding site plans could accommodate a 1,000 series building on a corner lot or an interior lot, each with dedicated customer parking and rear access for mail trucks. Now, while these designs were standard, they could be easily adapted to fit local conditions, and as such were suitable for all climates and geographical locations within the United States. Because of the variety, no two buildings were precisely identical, though all shared strong visual similarities. Plans were offered in two architectural styles, the International style and the Colonial Revival style. Yet even with such a choice, the International style proved to be the more popular option. In fact, examples of the International style 1,000 series post office buildings can still be found in use today in places like Waverly, Florida, Ulmer, South Carolina, and even in another Bluffton, this is Bluffton, Georgia. But a uniform architectural style for post offices, and particular international style, had its shortcomings. As James Bruns, the founding director of the National Postal Museum at the Smithsonian Institution, notes in his book, Great American Post Offices, in far too many instances, the heavy-handed modern styles imposed upon a local community either overpowered or understated the prevailing architectural flavor of the host community. In such instances, all too often, it became easy to pick out the post office simply because it visually did not fit in with the rest of the buildings in town. And this was especially true here in Bluffton, where our international style post office was built directly across Bridge Street from one of the town's most iconic antebellum residences, the Fripp House. In an effort to move mail more efficiently and quickly throughout the country, the post office created the Zone Improvement Plan, or zip code, which was inaugurated on Monday, July 1st, 1963. The new zip code was promoted by a cartoon character named Mr. Zip, which often appeared in advertisements placed in popular magazines and in local newspapers, and even had its own comic book, all specially curated to encourage the public's use of the new 5-digit numbering system. The department believed that the widespread usage of the zip code would significantly increase the speed with which mail could be delivered within the United States. These numeric codes were assigned sequentially based on geography and the location of the nearest mail sorting and distribution center for an area, with the lowest numbers found in New England and the highest numbers in the Pacific Northwest. Bluffton, along the coast of South Carolina, accordingly was assigned zip code 29910. By the early 1960s, the Post Office Department was handling approximately 80 billion pieces of mail nationwide. And in Bluffton, Postmaster Hayward was quoted in a local newspaper stating that mail business in this area has gone up. For example, 10 years ago, or about the time that this photograph was taken, revenue was less than $3,000, compared with $7,500 today. To accommodate the dramatic increase in demand, Mrs. Hayward further noted, the Post Office Department is now concentrating on constructing new postal units only where they are most urgently needed. And one of those locations slated to get a new post office was here in Bluffton. The department opened bids for a new post office in June of 1964. And in October, it was announced that it had negotiated a contract to construct and lease a new 1,000 square foot post office building to the lowest bidder, who was none other than the owner and landlord of the current post office and local postmaster, Lucille Hayward. Using the department's building designs catalog as her guide, Mrs. Hayward chose a 1,000 series building, approximately 1,000 square feet in size, in the international style. The new building would be constructed on Hayward family property, directly next door to the current post office. The construction cost a grand total of $10,488, which would be paid by Mrs. Hayward, who in turn would receive an annual rent of $1,248 for use of her new building. Mrs. Hayward, under the terms of the contract, would remain responsible for all real estate taxes and maintenance costs on the building. The new post office was constructed of concrete block and entirely clad in red brick, with a flat roof, large plate glass windows, and a striking canopy over its front entrance, all of which conform to the architectural requirements set forth in Chapter 3 of the Building Designs Catalog. The interior followed a standard plan for a 1,000 square foot building with a mailbox lobby, a service counter, workspace, storage, and 2 small bathrooms in the rear. Even interior paint colors, flooring materials, and the flagpole out front all conform to standards provided for in the catalog. On Sunday, May 16th, 1965, following 6 months of construction, Town of Bluffton officials, along with state and local dignitaries, gathered to dedicate their new post office, marking the first time ever that the town had a permanent, purpose-built post office facility. In her public remarks for the occasion, Postmaster Hayward predicted, "Our patrons will derive more enjoyment from doing business here. Their mail will be handled more efficiently, and this building and its up-to-date equipment will enable our postal employments to work under the best of conditions." She also noted that the fact that Bluffton has been chosen for a new post office reflects credit on our growing contribution to the economy and the life of the nation. At the center of the new design scheme, as the postmaster noted, was efficiency. Situated directly on Bridge Street, a major east-west thoroughfare through downtown Bluffton, the post office was readily accessible by automobile and mail truck. As Mrs. Hayward noted, the new facility will be a link with the postal system that today has over 45,000 postal installations nationwide. In addition, mail was available to be picked up from individual post boxes inside the lobby, which was now accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A modern convenience for Bluffton residents, though on occasion, as Mrs. Hayward's daughter once told me, some postal customers would telephone Mrs. Hayward's home to ask if she could bring their mail home with her from work so they could just pick it up from her directly. Mrs. Hayward always refused, citing post office regulations. The new post office, which the local press described simply as attractive, was decidedly mid-century modern in appearance. The one-story building with its red brick exterior, flat roof, and aluminum-framed plate glass windows was hardly low country style by any stretch of the imagination. However, at some point within the next few years, as seen as in this Polaroid from 1976, the post office was altered. Its distinctive flat roof was changed to a low-pitched front-end gable roof. The reason for this change and when it was actually done remains an unsolved mystery, as there are no surviving construction documents. Yet, even with its unusual architectural style, its massing and scale fit well into its setting next to the former post office building next door. And with a convenient location on Bridge Street, it was a popular gathering spot for the community. As former Mayor Emmett McCracken recalls, it was where you went if you needed to see someone, because everyone came to the post office every day. Mrs. Hayward retired as postmaster in 1975 on her 65th birthday and passed away at the age of 82 on December 16, 1992. In her obituary, listed among her many accomplishments, was the fact that she served as postmaster for 20 years. By the mid-1980s, the United States Postal Service, as successor to the Post Office Department, was leasing approximately 28,000 buildings from private owners all over the United States, like this one in Carl Place on Long Island, New York, which recently sold for $1.35 million. Other post offices are currently for sale if you happen to be in the market for one. In the years between 1965 and 1984, the population of Bluffton more than doubled, and the post office struggled to handle the increased demand for mail service, as evidenced by the lengthy waiting list kept on the postmaster's desk of Bluffton residents interested in renting a post office box. As a result, in April 1984, the Beaufort Gazette reported that the United States Postal Service had decided not to renew its lease with Mrs. Hayward and began a search for a suitable site upon which to build and lease a new, much larger post office building for the town. However, that plan was delayed for more than 5 years until a site was finally selected and a new 4,000 square foot building was constructed. In 1988, the post office building on Bridge Street was closed, the flag was lowered for the last time, and the iconic signage was removed from the building's front brick facade. Postal operations were relocated, this time again about a half a mile away into a new one-story post office building. However, in 2002, the post office, you guessed it, moved again, this time to its present location, a 26,000 square foot building that, as according to the architects, joined modern design with traditional low country architecture. But the current building is noteworthy for more than just its style of architecture. For the first time in Bluffton's history, the post office was no longer located within the historic 1 square mile village. From 1959 until 1971, literally thousands of 1000 series post office buildings were constructed across the country, all in compliance with the design standards catalog. But while these buildings were intended to be modern, efficient, and distinctive, many became functionally obsolete as the United States Postal Service began to face financial challenges with increased competition from overnight carriers and other technologies during the ensuing years of the 20th century. Many of these buildings were closed. For example, according to reports from the Postal Service, over the last decade, more post offices have been closed in the Commonwealth of Kentucky than in any other state. Since a post office literally put the community on the map and established its place within the United States, when those buildings close, it's not only the loss of a physical post office, but also the loss of the community's very identity. Now, while many have been demolished, some surviving decommissioned post office buildings have been adapted to suit different needs. For example, the former Bogue Chitto, Mississippi post office, built about the same time as our post office, was vacated in 1996. Today, it serves as home for the Masonic Lodge number 260. Likewise, in Lee Summit, Missouri, the post office building was constructed in 1962, and in 2016, it was rehabilitated into the Bridge Space, a co-working and meeting space that brought new life into a building that otherwise would have faced demolition. In 2018, it was listed in the National Register of Historic Places under Criterion C as an intact example of a 1000 series type building. Now, since the Bluffton post office was closed nearly 25 years ago, the building has been used for different purposes, as a private storage unit by the Hayward family, a local newspaper office, and rented as a studio and living space for 2 local artists. In February 2022, the current owners, who you'll hear from later, petitioned the Bluffton Historic Preservation Commission for a certificate of appropriateness to convert the 1965 post office building into a new private residence. Plans included the addition of a 528 square foot master bedroom suite on the rear elevation and a 315 square foot side porch on the eastern elevation. Though the proposed new floor plan was to be modified for domestic use, the building's distinctive architectural features would be restored. The commission conditionally approved the plans and construction began shortly thereafter. As part of the rehabilitation project, the owners sought to have the building individually listed in the National Register, but the South Carolina State Historic Preservation Office determined it was not eligible for listing due to a lack of historic integrity, writing that the original design of the building had been compromised by the replacement of the flat roof with a front gable roof, the loss of historic signage, and changes to the interior. But I'd like to point out that at least the historic flagpole remains in place. On April 6, 2022, our Historic Preservation Commission made a formal recommendation to Town Council to have the former Bluffton Health Center and the Old Bluffton Post Office designated as contributing resources to the Old Town Bluffton Historic District. And in connection with National Preservation Month in May 2022, Town Council made those designations. In the resolution for the Post Office, Town Council recognized that the subject property embodies the distinctive characteristics of a 1000 series international style post office building constructed from standard designs contained in the Post Office Department's Building Designs Catalog, published in 1959. And the subject property was the first purpose-built United States Post Office for the town of Bluffton. To commemorate the occasion, Bluffton Today published a special editorial cartoon celebrating these two new designations to our local historic district. The first editions since 2008. The Bluffton Post Office, once a symbol of the Post Office Department's efforts to be modern, efficient, and distinctive, now has a new life. Today simply known as number 41 Bridge Street, it no longer serves a civic function, but has been transformed into a stunning private residence. I often wonder what Mrs. Hayward would think about this rehabilitation project if she were still around. Nevertheless, the old post office remains a modern example of the architectural history of the South Carolina Low Country for years to come. Thank you.
I've heard versions of that in practice and just through the office while we look at this building, but never do I listen to any version of it and not pick up something new. And every single time it makes me smile because I think of all of the little towns across the country that I've been in where they're correct. You look at a post office and you know exactly what it is that you're looking at. Whether it does fit into that town's architecture or if it stands out like it did here for a while and now it blends into the fabric of our historic district. So thank you, Glenn. Now I would like to invite Debbie Wunder, she moved chairs on me here, Debbie Wunder up to share some of the challenges and victories that she experienced with the renovation of her building. Debbie and her husband moved to Bluffton a few years ago and immediately joined in everywhere they can. They have made friends, I think, on every corner and every park of this entire historic district, and I'm sure well beyond. I see them out walking their dogs just about 7 days a week, talking to someone different every single time. I don't know how they find as many different people to speak to as they do. Debbie has even joined our Historic Preservation Commission. So she's not only been involved with people socially, but she's also decided to step it up and join the Historic Preservation Commission. From researching it to wielding the hammer themselves, Debbie and Rusty's efforts with first the rate and now the Old Bluffton Post Office have been truly amazing to watch. So Debbie, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So Debbie, why don't you start by telling us where are you originally from and how long have you been in Bluffton?
Well, I've lived all over the place. I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and lived in different countries, different cities, but my family always had a home base in Hilton Head. So we moved to Hilton Head in 1983. So I am familiar with the area. I've seen it grow, I've seen it change, and Bluffton was definitely one of the places that later in life I just noticed this huge change and felt I needed to be a part of it.
Great. Now, how many properties do you actually own in Bluffton?
I own two. I own the rate and the post office. We bought the post office first in 2015, and I always had my heart on the rate. And at the time, a couple owned it, and I had a realtor, and her and I always kept, sorry, I'm a little nervous, I'm not a public speaker.
She's doing great. Yep.
We had a realtor, and they're like, yeah, you know what, they're not willing to sell it, they maybe will turn it into an office, and I'm like, well, if they're ever willing to sell it, just please let me know. So we didn't have enough money, we were living, our careers had us in different cities, so when the rate became available, I'm like, whatever they're asking for, I'll pay it. I'll find the money, we'll do. Sorry. Good. Got this. You got it. They got me. I'm just very passionate about these buildings because I put so much of our heart and souls into it. I'm sorry. I'll get there. I'll get back. I promise. But when the rate became available, we found the money, we bought it, and that's where our focus was in the very beginning because the roof was collapsed. There was like a whole ecosystem living on top of it, and we were like, you know what, we're going to put the post office on the back burner for a minute and focus on keeping this building from falling apart. And then once we had the rate together and everything was fine, you know, we saved some money, and like, okay, now we're ready to do the post office. And when we bought it, it came with renters, so that was helping pay the mortgage until we were ready to do our thing.
Okay, so when you got the post office, what condition was it in?
It was not great, but you know, we walked by it and we're like, you know what, like the windows are kind of, you know, they're cracked and I see a bullet hole, but there's people living in there, so how bad can it be? Like if they're living there, clearly there's plumbing and electricity, and it probably needs like 30, 40 grand, and you know, we could live there. We were wrong.
Yeah. Now, did you know it was a post office?
Yes, when you look, like, we suspected, when you look at it, you know, it had the flagpole, it was a red brick building, it had big storefront windows. We're like, this looks like it used to be a post office, and we really were drawn to that commercial mid-century vibe, so.
So, when you bought it, what was your vision?
Our vision was it was going to be a place for us to live, and because we had no idea what it looked like inside, but you know what, we'll just blow out the inside, it'll have this loft type vibe, like it'll be cool, like we'll have our dogs there, like it's a great place to live. So that was our vision, was to bring it back and keep it the way it was, and at the time we were fully aware that we could bulldoze it and build whatever we wanted on it, but we just thought it was so unique to the town, and there was no other building except for the Bluffton Health Center, the red brick on May River that looked like it. It was just so unique that like we just didn't want something that looked very cookie cutter. We wanted to keep that building the way it was.
Right. So I have to ask, what were you thinking?
What was I thinking? It couldn't be that bad inside. It couldn't be that bad. And it was just the town that also drew us, you know, just walking around and talking to people. And my husband, I wish he was here right now because he's much better than I am at this. But.
Okay.
Yes.
He's on tour.
Yes.
Yes. So your project actually required a certificate of appropriateness, which meant you had to come in front of the Historic Preservation Commission.
Yes.
And were there any particular challenges as you went through the process?
You know what, we really leaned into Amanda at Pierce Scott. And this was also around the time of COVID when we were looking to make moves to try and renovate it. So I was glued to the Facebook broadcasts of the HPC meetings, and that's where I really became informed. I saw what was getting passed, what wasn't, and I realized that, you know what, if you hire a local architect that knows the UDO, they're gonna make sure that what your decisions are and what you wanna do with it is gonna get passed. So I really leaned into Amanda.
That's great. So once work started, did you encounter any surprises?
Many. Many. Asbestos, and this is a Savannah abatement right here, and that is rusty. We tore, there was carpet, and then we saw like these, I guess the telltale 6x6 green linoleum tiles. And everybody's like, that's asbestos. So I sent it in, had it tested, sure enough. And then we had it abated because I don't know if we could ever live knowing that there was asbestos underneath the floor. So we spent the money on that. When we were sold the property, we were told it was hooked up to city sewer. Not the case. Big septic tank we didn't know about. The large propane tank that was buried, we didn't know how big that thing was until we had to dig it up. And then also the biggest surprise were the two roofs. We thought, I'm like, oh, there's a pitched roof, you know, like we didn't know that there originally was built a flat tar roof on top. So my husband, all by himself, took off that pitched roof that was not so great build, and then all of a sudden we found the tar flat roof there. We needed help to get that done, but a good surprise was between the drop ceiling on the inside and the tar roof, there was all this old pine that was in perfect condition. Like from the 60s, it was just so hard, and we repurposed it throughout our house and the carriage house.
Right.
And I know our crafts guy, our carpenters looked at it, and they were kind of like, went like this because that pine was so hard, it was just going to take more work to cut through it and use it, you know, in the structure.
Sure.
So. Oh, also, when Rusty, there was a cinder block wall between the male and female bathrooms, and Rusty knocked that down, and in the space in between, we found all of these like old vodka bottles and that like either they were just too lazy to throw it out, but that's what they liked to drink while they were building the post office.
My favorite is the corn whiskey. I mean,
Yes. Yep.
They call that Bluffton insulation.
Yes. Thank you, Adam.
Any particular challenges you faced during the construction process?
Okay.
And I hope this picture is not triggering, you know, stories.
Everything was a challenge. You know, when we took the roof off, the cinder block walls, we had to refortify them. We had to, with rebar and pour cement in order to support the pitch roof that we were doing. All new plumbing, all new electrical, all new HVAC. And then, of course, there is the things that anybody who's undergone a renovation or construction you deal with, like things getting stolen. Like we had like $3,000 worth of windows stolen. We had a plumber, shady plumber that never finished the job, did a bad job, and walked away with like $14K of our money. And I think the one thing, like it was just things like that that you deal with. But I think the one thing that we learned is that, you know, our 18 plumbers, the one that did the rate, they were amazing, but they were busy on like a big fancy job in Palmetto Bluff, and we just should have waited for them. So we went with like the B team, and then that happened. And I think like a lesson learned is that sometimes if you can afford to take the time to wait for the good people, wait for the good people.
So as I mentioned, the post office was designated by town council as a new contributing resource 2 years ago. What was that like for you as the owner?
It's an honor. It's an honor to own something that so many people care about. Sorry. Like I said, we worked so hard on it. And we love living here. We love the people. And so many times people have walked by and like, can we lend a hand? And somebody will pick up a shovel and help us. And, you know, that really cemented things for us.
That's great.
Sorry.
Oh, you're doing
Sorry.
great. So,
Thanks.
you received 2 Bluffton Historic Preservation grants. One was for the roof, and one was for the windows.
Yes.
So tell us about that process.
Well, we're not familiar with, you know, with government paperwork and all that, so we leaned into Amanda at Pierce Scott, and then everybody here, you and Katie, were so helpful, like in terms of just the paperwork and trying to figure out what we needed to do. And I think the only concession that we that we made from our original plans to, in order to become a contributing structure, was the pitch of the roof. We just had to keep it to what the original second roof was. And yeah, other than that, it's like I felt like the town really held our hand through the application process.
Great. And we invited the dogs to both big check giveaways.
The family.
All right, since hindsight is always 2020, would you do anything differently?
Yes, I definitely would do a few things differently. Rusty and I talked about this. It's like we were playing checkers when we should have been playing chess. We should have been like forethinking like everything ahead of time. Like just anything from like where our things are going to be to the window placements, vetting the subcontractors. We should have done that a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what has been the most rewarding part of the project? Now that it's done.
Now that it's done, living in like our vision. You know, we obviously you make concessions along the way, but just living where we are and the placement. I mean, like Joni Hayward's our neighbor. Like, what could be better than that? You know, all our neighbors. The Schmelters are awesome. The Colburns are awesome. The Wards across the street, like they're the most friendly people, and you feel like somebody always has your back. And also living so close to the river, we walk there twice a day with our dogs. So.
Great. So now that you have successfully rehabilitated two buildings, the rate and the post office, any other rehabilitation projects on the horizon?
No, we're pausing on that until like estimate a couple years, but we're tapped out.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Any words of wisdom for someone who's contemplating a major rehabilitation project?
Just try and forethink. Try and plan for the worst. Be there every day if you can when you're doing construction. Get to know the craftsmen, because if you learn their names, or say it's like it's a 98-degree day and they're out there like sawing your wood, like bring them drinks, bring them cold watermelon, like because if you care about them, they care about your project. You know?
So, what's it like to live in an old post office?
It's awesome. It's awesome. Like, I love our location. I can't wait. It's going to be our first Christmas parade in that location. So come by for some like chorizo egg wraps.
Now, since you've been involved in rehabilitating the 1000 Series Post Office building, have you noticed any others around the country in your travels?
Yeah, you do. You see them, and you're like, oh, like that's got to be around the same time that ours was built.
Right.
But you see them, and you know that. You know, if it's something other than a post office, I think there's like one still that's still an operating post office. It's like, you know, somebody took some time to try and keep that building there instead of bulldozing it. So.
Yeah, so this one is Ulmer, South Carolina, nearly identical to what yours looked like when it was brand new. I use this as an illustration in my talk, which I wrote 2 years ago. And I was looking for an image of it, so for tonight's Q&A, and Googled to pull up an image because I didn't want to drive all the way to Umler for a photograph for tonight. And I found out that in March, the post office sent out a press release saying that this location has been temporarily suspended due to facility damages. And as of today, they're still not reopened yet. So I'm not sure what their issues are, but this one used to be operating, and right now it's not quite operating, but I do notice them around a lot as well.
Could be an opportunity for somebody.
Someone's, yeah, great opportunity. Now I have to say, you know, what do the dogs think about the new house?
Love it. They get to look out the window and bark at everybody as they walk by. Sorry, you're walking by and my dogs are barking at you.
That's okay. Well, thank you, Debbie. So we would like to open up to some We have a few minutes for questions.
I know that you and Rusty made really specific design choices for your house, and one of them was the floor, which I know was a really hard thing to kind of accomplish. your terrazzo floor. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Well, I always thought of like, because it was a commercial building, I just thought industrial. And, you know, in industrial, you think of like airports and schools, and you think of those terrazzo floors with all the little stuff in it. And then when I was talking to Glenn, he said one of the choices somebody made when they were building the building, they could choose linoleum or terrazzo. So when knowing that the idea I had in my head was actually historically significant, I'm like, oh, awesome. But try and find somebody to do a terrazzo floor in a 1,000 square foot building, because these companies, they do colleges, they do airports, they do hospitals, and like we're small peanuts, like real small peanuts, you know. So we had a budget to work in, and luckily there was one guy, I'm not gonna name his name, he does amazing work but he was just too much money and he wasn't willing to work with us. But I found Bonnets, and Bonnets has a Southeast division, and they were willing to work with us on our price and the time, and they just did an amazing job. If you're ever walking by and you want to see our amazing floors, let me know.
I have to say, they are amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Also the windows.
Thank you.
The smoky windows, yeah.
Why don't you tell everybody here how you have it set up as far as, you know, your bedroom, the bathroom, what you've done, you know,
Right,
separately
the main area of the post office, like we didn't know that we could add on to it, so when we bought it. And Amanda at Pierce Scott was like, you know, you can't change the outside, but you can add on to it. So I'm like, okay. And at first we're like, okay, 1,000 square feet, we can live in that. We lived in apartments in New York City and LA. And then when we found we could add, I'm like, okay, we'll just add our bedroom and a bathroom on the back. But the main, the big original structure is just an open area. So it's an open area concept with a pitched roof, with a kitchen and a living room and a small dining area. And then we created a separate area for an office, but we got rid of the walls for the bathrooms, and that's kind of like a guest bathroom.
Talk about the windows and the little.
Oh yeah, so when we went for the second grant for the windows for repairing them, we needed to keep and wanted to keep the original framing, but because the glass was cracked and you know, and just a mess. Yeah, it was in bad shape. We needed to replace the windows. So instead of using window treatments for privacy, we looked into e-glass. And if you've ever seen those movies where somebody's in an office and they press a button and the glass goes frosty, that's what those are. So if you're driving by or walking by, one minute the frosty, and the next minute you can sit in, we just press a button, and it's just water molecules in between glass.
It's super cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
So.
Is the front door functional?
It is, and it still has the original like arm on it. Like Rusty needs to do a little bit of repairing on it, but yeah, it's still open. It's still the original lock, original framing, and the arm up above.
Do you use that as your front door?
We do, but really, I think our front door has now become the porch door. So, but our porch door was the security door inside the post office. So it's a really big, heavy door, and the glass panels all have chicken wire in it. So we just repurposed that as our porch door.
Gorgeous. Thank you.
It's really cool.
And talk about your kitchen and your design. It's kind of finished.
We just kept it real modern, kind of like, on one hand, it's like, it's a new structure on the inside, but with the terrazzo floors and just a gray countertop and white cabinets that just kind of disappear and everything in. Because it's so hot down here, we wanted to walk, and you know, in the summertime, when you walk in, you just want to feel cool immediately, and that was kind of the vibe for that.
Well, he made the cabinets, didn't
He did, and he's still making them.
I think you will be for a while yet. Yes, you had a question?
Yeah, this is more of a historical question, but you said that part of why the application for it to be an official historic site was because the original letters that said like the U.S. Postal Office were removed.
Mm-hmm.
Was that because of a more practical thing, because there had been a new location and they didn't want to have signage on both, or what was kind of the process on that?
When the post office ceased operations on Bridge Street, the post office requirements made them take post office stuff down, including the sign, remove the mailbox that used to be at the front door, all that stuff went away. So that's what happened to it.
You can see like some of the lettering still.
Yeah, some of the anchors are still on the wall from where those were aluminum letters were installed. Right out of the design catalog.
Not over here.
What are your plans for the rate?
Well, the rate is done. We finished that. So right now we rent it out to our contractor. When we had it finished, I was like, okay, how are we gonna pay this mortgage and our rent? And I'm like, I guess we gotta look for somebody to rent it to. And Josh Simpson, he was our contractor for the rate and the post office, he came to us and he's like, what do you think about me being your first renter? I'm like, absolutely. I'm like, you did an amazing job. I know you're gonna take care of it. Like, please. I'm like, deal. You know?
It's like an office usually.
Yeah, that's his office, yeah. Oh,
Sorry, I have a question. And I'll say that this is maybe more of like a general question, just as it seems like the historic panel plays a big role as personal individuals come to look for the preservation. What would you say when it comes to maintaining like the low country look? I have noticed that like, what is the advice that is given to people coming in for these projects, especially with a lot of the, I wouldn't say the wildlife, but the trees, right? They're a very historic, iconic look for the area, but there's kind of a balance, you know, of keeping them. We've seen them do some damage, and I was just kind of wondering, like, if there's ever a discussion in any of the historic preservation process.
Yeah, so almost every project that I can think of, and Katie could probably correct me if I've forgotten one, when trees are involved, there's a discussion, there's a tree ordinance, there's trees in the UDO, which is, if you don't know our lingo, is the Unified Development Ordinance. For several weeks when I was first in town, I'm thinking UDO, UFO, like I don't know what this is. Unified Development Ordinance. Talk about trees. So we are very strong supporter of our trees. We love our trees. We hate to lose our trees. Sometimes we have to, and then we have to plant new trees in their place.
My peanut gallery answer over here is that it's section 5.3.3 of the UDO, but the requirement is that all site planning must be done to conserve the existing canopy of the lots to the greatest extent possible. There are obviously some lots that are existing where a tree will have to come down, so if you're doing an addition on a house, we try and get that to frame around the tree or in a different direction than the tree. But there's also a requirement for the canopy coverage at the end of development to be 75% of the lot at full growth, not including rooftops. So that means that a lot of times you'll see these little trees, they should be 12 feet in height at planting, that get installed afterwards, so that while we had to take some down in order to continue the growth of Bluffton, which is happening at a rapid pace, in 20 years from now, you'll see those and they'll be good-sized trees, and in 50, they'll be even better than that. And for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, you're gonna get these massive oaks and massive trees that are just growing throughout town, and they'll look like they've always been here. So we do try our best to maintain the canopy as it exists, but if not, we replant it in. Yes.
Given that you discovered two roofs, how did you choose which one to go for?
Well, we needed a new roof because both of them weren't good. I know that the pitched roof, like the I-beam for it was like kind of not the right width of wood, and they were kind of like pieced together. And then the tar roof underneath it, it would just leaked, and it was a bad roof, and that's why they built the pitched roof on top. So there was no keeping the roof. And we had to do everything engineering-wise to make sure that the current roof would be supported, so.
Hi.
Is the house haunted?
No, I hope not. I hope not. Somebody said, I don't know if it was Joni, that somebody used to be a kennel or somebody kept their dogs there, and maybe we have to, I don't know, maybe there's ghosts of dogs. I don't know.
Carl scares them off.
Sure.
Well, thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your wonderful questions. From large projects like Debbie has taken on, and the stories, or the little projects like the stories of us telling our visitors about these projects as they come to town, each one of you has the opportunity to be the people-saving places that the National Trust talks about. Next time you're out and about in the Historic District, take a little bit more time to look at the buildings that we celebrate, not only in this room, but in our everyday lives. The ones that we eat in, the ones that we shop in, the ones that we live in, the ones that our friends do those things in. and think about which space you want to save, which space you want to see have things that are done to it, where you can watch these buildings create more history. I promise to be brief in my closing tonight, but before we go, I have a couple items. They're all mostly housekeeping. The first is most of you received a little comment feedback card. If you could fill those out and return them to staff, we would love to hear what you think about tonight's presentation so that we can make sure that the ones in the future reflect some of those comments. The second is that following the symposium, there is a reception hosted by the Historic Bluffton Foundation at the Hayward House, which is located just down the street here on Boundary. We will all be walking over there from staff, so if you're not familiar with where it is, you can get familiar there. There will be some snacks and some drinks there that we can all enjoy and continue the conversation about preservation. And then the final thing that I'd like to share is that we have a token for Debbie to say thank you for all of the time, effort, and energy you put into your buildings. But this is not a token just for that. This is mostly for tonight because there's no way that we can say thank you enough for all of the work that you've put into those buildings. So, do you want to present it? Because I'll let you do it since you guys.
Do me over here.
Okay.
So for the audience, what we have is a small, again, token of our esteem, little map of historic Bluffton, and some lovely flowers courtesy of our friend Lindy. So thank you again for joining us tonight.